My dad died in a boating accident, but 6 days later, I saw him drinking tequila with his mistress in Belize. Instead of calling the cops, I let the funeral happen, then crashed it with a slideshow of his fake death, stolen money, and insurance scam. The police showed up right on cue. I'm Ryan, 26. My dad, Frank, was the kind of guy everyone thought walked on water. He coached Little League, grilled burgers in a stupid apron, and gave terrible financial advice with total confidence. He wasn't perfect, but he was dependable. So when I got the call saying he died in a boating accident, I damn near collapsed. They said the boat capsized off the Gulf Coast. No body recovered, just a busted hull, a few scattered belongings, and his wedding ring, which, for the record, he hadn't worn in years. The Coast Guard filed the paperwork. The police dropped by. It was all official enough to feel real, even if it didn't feel right. Mom, Linda, went into full shutdown mode. She didn't cry at first, just sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, clutching a mug of cold tea like it was a lifeline. I handled the calls, the funeral arrangements, everything. Because of course I did. I was the strong one, the only child, the adult now apparently. The whole thing fell off from the beginning. For one, Frank was a boring boater. He hated the water, got sunburnt in 5 minutes, and never left the harbor without 6 life vests. Suddenly, he's taking a solo joyride in rough waters and forgets how not to die? Please. Then came the will, or the lack of it. He'd always been obsessive about having a contingency plan, but suddenly we were staring at a half-finished document from 2 years ago, and a lawyer shrugging like someone spilled coffee on the rest. Oh, and the company? Completely screwed. His construction firm, the one he'd built for 2 decades, was circling the drain. Payroll bounced, the accountant ghosted, and when I finally got into the business account, it was practically empty. That's when Uncle Mike and Aunt June started hovering. They meant well, I think, but their version of comforting was saying stuff like, well, at least he went out doing what he loved. First of all, what he loved was lasagna and not paying taxes. Second, if he loved boating so much, maybe he should have left behind a paddle and a damn note. Sheila showed up around then too. She was technically Dad's co-worker from way back, but everyone knew they were close. Not scandalously close, just enough to raise eyebrows and get Mom twitchy at family barbecues. She cried at the house, hugged Mom, brought casseroles, gave me a card with a Bible verse and a $50 gas gift card, like I was going to grieve my way to Shell. But something about her grief felt manufactured, like she was trying out for the part of devastated ex-lover in a soap opera. Her voice cracked too cleanly. Her hugs lasted too long. I caught her looking around our living room like she was taking inventory. Then the detective came by. Officer Grayson. Polite, curious, efficient. He said it was standard follow-up, that they had to confirm a few details. Nothing big, just where the boat came from, if Frank had any medical conditions, that kind of thing. I answered everything I could, but when I mentioned the boat was borrowed from a friend of Dad's, he paused and scribbled a little too hard in his notepad. That was the first moment someone else looked suspicious. I asked Mom if Dad had ever mentioned taking out a new loan or doing anything weird with his accounts. She blinked like I'd spoken in another language. Either she really had no idea what was happening, or she was Oscar-level committed to the role of blindsided widow. Meanwhile, condolences kept pouring in from friends and co-workers, all sharing the same script. He was such a great man. He loved you both so much. He'd be proud of how strong you're being. Thanks, Karen. I'm sure he'd be really proud of leaving behind a foreclosure notice and a half-eaten protein bar in his glove compartment. The funeral date got set. Closed casket. Everyone agreed it was more respectful that way. I started planning the service like I was ordering a sad wedding. Flowers, music, slideshow. I even found a photo of Dad in his stupid fishing hat, the one he wore once and never again because it made him look bald, and put it on the damn pamphlets. But deep down, something still wasn't clicking. It wasn't just grief. It was this gnawing feeling that none of it was true, that I was being cast in a play I didn't audition for, and everyone else knew the script but me. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was just being paranoid, grieving in the form of suspicion. But then Marcus, my oldest friend, the guy who knew Frank better than most, said something that stuck with me. Have you ever noticed how your dad was always 2 steps ahead? Like he'd already planned how to get out of any mess? Yeah, I had. And for the first time, I started to wonder if he'd done it again. It was just another Tuesday when Marcus, my oldest friend, tagged me in a photo that changed everything. I was sitting in a half-empty coffee shop, trying to care about spreadsheets for the family business. Then my phone buzzed. A grainy snapshot of some beach bar scoreboard in Belize with a smiling guy who looked disturbingly like my dad, Frank. He was clutching a margarita the size of a basketball, and his arm was draped around Sheila, the same coworker who sent casseroles to my mother after the supposed accident. At first, I thought it might be a cruel prank. Marcus has a twisted sense of humor, but he knew exactly what to do to goad me. He didn't caption it with anything except a winking emoji. So I messaged him, very funny. Now delete it before I sick Aunt June on you. He answered with a shrug emoji and, open your eyes, dude. That's when every shitty cliche about denial hit me like a semi-truck. I stared at the photo, then zoomed in. There was Dad's distinctive undercut and the faded tattoo on his forearm. That tattoo was the same one he'd shown me when I turned 16, swearing it meant family first. I spent the next hour jumping between social media and airline websites. On Facebook, the bar had tagged Sheila's account in a bunch of posts. They were all dated 3 days ago. There was one video of Sheila waving at the camera, saying, "Wish you were here, Linda's sweetheart." That one made the blood drain from my face. It was the smoking gun I needed. I opened my laptop at home and started digging. Frank's credit card statement from the past month was a minefield. $100 lounge fee in Miami. $1,000 at a duty-free shop in Cancun. Hotel charges in Belize City. They added up to tens of thousands. Every transaction had a name I didn't recognize. The kicker was 3 cash withdrawals in quick succession, $20, $30, $40,000. That was the kind of money that would drain an account dry, like the one I'd just found empty when trying to pay for the funeral. Then I checked the company's bank records. Remember that empty balance from the funeral preparations? It wasn't just empty. It had been siphoned out in a single overnight transfer to an account labeled simply as consulting services. That was bullshit code for secret mistress fund. I printed every line item, every transaction date, and every merchant detail. I faxed the documents to myself because my Wi-Fi connection was spotty, and I wanted hard copies in case someone tried to delete evidence. Somewhere during this, I realized I was shaking. Not tears or sorrow, but anger. Real, unfiltered rage. The kind that makes you want to punch holes in walls and tell people exactly what you think of their hypocritical condolences. So I took a long shower, scrubbed my skin raw, and decided I needed a plan. First step. Decide if I wanted to confront them in Belize or bring them to justice from home. The loner in me loved the idea of a dramatic confrontation on foreign soil. The part of me that read too many true crime documentaries argued for patience and backup. I called Officer Grayson and left a voicemail tip. I didn't name names, just provided enough details, dredged up transaction records, social media proof, and a hint about the funeral. He called back an hour later, sounding both skeptical and intrigued. He asked if I had proof. I said yeah, and I'm not telling you everything yet. He promised discretion. Then he asked about my travel plans. I lied and said I was flying out to Belize next week. He responded with a polite, "Be careful," which sounded like something out of a movie. The worst part was telling Linda. I sat her down in the living room and slid the printed Facebook photo across the coffee table. Her eyes went wide, and she reached for the picture like it was a gift. Then she trembled and fell apart. She cried. He would never do that to us. I didn't comfort her. Instead, I shoved the bank statements at her and said, "He already did." She screamed, demanded I take the evidence back, and accused me of messing with her grief. I let her scream. Then I left because I needed air. I called Tyler, my friend from college, and asked him to meet at a dive bar downtown. He listened as I unloaded everything. He said, "You need to go? Right now?" I hesitated. My mind raced through every worst-case scenario. Dad notices I'm missing at the funeral, flees with Sheila. Dad sees me and calls the cops. I get arrested in Belize for stalking. But Tyler reminded me, "You're walking into a country where half the world's shady shit happens. They don't know you. They'll laugh at you. Do it." So I booked a ticket that night. Nonstop flight, red-eye. I didn't sleep. I packed only the essentials, passport, wallet, and copies of every document. I canceled my morning meetings at the office and emailed Mom a vague excuse about a business trip. Then I sat on the couch with my bags packed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt like I was calling the shots. In the end, I decided to delay the trip. I needed more. More proof. More backup. More time for the police tip to simmer. I offered a silent toast to my own indecision and crawled into bed. Tomorrow I will start the final phase. But tonight, I felt the thrill of the hunt, the kind of adrenaline that only happens when you realize you've been living a lie. I lay there listening to the hum of the AC, planning my next move. Nothing felt safe until my father and Sheila faced the music they had set in motion. I knew I needed concrete evidence. Half-assed suspicions and clandestine photo tags weren't enough to bring down a man like my dad or to convince the police to act. So I turned my attention to the life insurance policy. It made too much sense. Scheme the death, collect the payout, disappear with your mistress. First, I tracked down the insurance broker that Dad had used for years. The guy was a family friend of sorts, but when I called him pretending to be Mom's financial advisor, he hesitated. He asked for details I provided from the wreck report, case number, claim reference, nothing he could refuse. 2 days later, he emailed me a copy of the policy. It was dated exactly 3 months before the fake accident, with a payout of $2 million. The beneficiary was Sheila. No joint beneficiary designation, no surviving spouse clause, just Sheila. I felt the first jolt of satisfaction. Here was proof that he had planned it all like a heist. Next, I needed financial trails. I logged into Dad's online insurance portal under the guise of a personal representative. Thankfully, the password hints were easy: favorite pet, hometown elementary school. I guessed Rex and Lincoln. Jackpot. I downloaded policy documents, beneficiary statements, and the email threads where Dad and Sheila had discussed strategy. One message stood out: we'll do it on the 15th. No one will suspect a thing with hurricane season. It was timestamped 6 months before the wreck. Holding those emails made me feel filthy proud. It was like catching a kid confessing to stealing cookies. Only this kid had stolen millions and staged his own murder. Then I turned to the construction business account. I already had printed transaction records showing the overnight transfer to consulting services. Now I had to trace where that money went. It was trickling into multiple shell accounts, all under various Ltd names. I followed wire instructions through 2 intermediary banks, first to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, then back to a UK trust. It took hours of phone calls, emails, and false identities, but eventually I got records that showed every destination. Sheila's private shell companies, luxury property trusts, even a Swiss-numbered account flagged for review. By this time, my mom was convinced I was losing it. She had caught me pacing the living room floor at 3 a.m., muttering about fiduciary responsibility and fraud statutes. She tried to get me to stop, but I ignored her. She might have been tragic in a black dress, but she had been oblivious to my dad's betrayal from day one. My next move was consulting Uncle Mike. He had experience in legal logistics and owning a bar, which meant knowing people. I showed him the insurance policy and bank trail prints. His eyes went wide. He asked about evidence backups. I nodded and handed him the digital file on a USB drive. He said he knew a guy, Officer Grayson's partner, someone he'd helped out at a community event years ago. Uncle Mike could connect us discreetly. I met Officer Grayson at a diner at dawn. He arrived in plain clothes, wearing aviator sunglasses inside the coffee shop like he was auditioning for Miami Vice. I ordered coffee and left the USB drive under a sugar packet. He slipped it into his pocket and nodded at me. No exchanges, no thanks. He said they would verify, but needed one more piece of proof: Dad's signature next to Sheila's on any official legal document besides the insurance policy. Something less obvious. So I dug through Dad's old desk at home, claiming I was organizing his office for tax purposes. I found a stack of lease agreements for his company vehicle and an apartment rental contract for a temporary project manager. The signatures on both matched the cursive in the insurance paperwork. I photographed them with my phone, annotated the images, and sent them in an encrypted group chat to Officer Grayson with the caption, "Follow the paper trail." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Meanwhile, I received an anonymous tip from an offshore whistleblower site that a high-value transaction had just been flagged by Swiss authorities. It turned out Sheila had made a suspicious withdrawal to purchase a second property in the Alps. The bank had alerted an EU fraud task force. Suddenly, the Swiss account was under review. That meant if I played my cards right, I could have international law enforcement knocking on Sheila's door. With all evidence aligned, I met with Linda and laid out the plan. We would let the funeral go ahead, but I would control the narrative. We'd get the projector loaded with slides, have Officer Grayson on standby, and in the middle of the eulogy, I would drop the bombshell. She looked at me with tear-stained eyes and said, "Promise me you'll still help me bury him with dignity." I just said, "We're burying more than him. We're burying his lies." In the days that followed, I rehearsed my lines, timed the slideshow transitions to the second, and coordinated with the officer. I felt like I was staging a very morbid heist movie. And just like in every good crime caper, there was tension, uncertainty, and a countdown. The heist wasn't to steal something. It was to expose a crime in progress. And if everything went according to plan, Dad and Sheila would get their comeuppance in front of everyone who ever believed his bullshit. By the time that Friday rolled around, I was running on adrenaline and 4 hours of sleep. Every scenario had been anticipated. Projector failure, Sheila's last-minute no-show, Dad's smug smile. None of it mattered. I had built the case like a fortress, ready for the final breach. It was time to let the truth explode. I arrived at the church 2 hours before the funeral service. The place was empty except for a lone tech guy fiddling with the projector and a couple of florists planting fake peace lilies around the altar. I carried a thick manila folder full of evidence prints and a small laptop in a black case. My heart pounded like a drum solo as I set everything up. It was absurd, really, that I was here preparing for my own father's funeral, but not in the way anyone expected. First task, the slideshow. I opened my laptop, connected it to the church's AV system, and imported the folder of photos and screenshots. There were the vacation bar shots in Belize, the bank statements with highlighted transfers. The insurance policy shows Sheila as the sole beneficiary, and the screenshots of the Swiss account alert. Each image had a timestamp. Each image told a part of the story no one except me had seen. I arranged them in sequence, set each slide to advance every 8 seconds, and tested the transitions twice. Next, I hid the USB that contained the master copy in my suit pocket. The laptop would remain locked until I hit presentation mode. To everyone else, I was just another mourner setting up a generic memorial slideshow. I tested the remote. It clicked. The click echoed in the empty hall. Good. Uncle Mike showed up. He wore a press suit and a tie patterned with subtle crosses. He looked like he was ready to officiate a press conference more than a funeral. He clapped a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Kid, are you sure about this? It's a funeral service. This is supposed to be sacred ground, not a crime scene." I met his gaze and said quietly, "This is the only place he'll ever hear the truth." He nodded, grim. He handed me a small flask of whiskey. "Nervous?" he asked. I tucked the flask away, terrified, but less than I would be if I let him skate. He smiled thinly. "I've got your back. Detective Grayson will be in the front row, plain clothes. Just hit that show and stick to the script." After he left, I practiced. I stood at the lectern, flipped through slides with the remote. My voice sounded hollow in the cavernous room as I read the first lines of my planned eulogy. "We are here to mourn a man who never existed." I stopped. That was too blunt. I changed it to, "We are here to lay to rest the person who betrayed every single one of us." Better, but still harsh. I rewrote it in my notebook. My pen scratched across paper as I worked out the cadence. At one point, the tech guy approached and asked if I needed to install a font. He wanted to load some fancy typeface for Mom's slide quoting scripture. I nodded and got him set up to install it. He left, clueless. At least my slides were safe. Then came the floral cross. Mom's favorite Baptist church insisted on covering the altar with flowers. I had to work around them. I adjusted the projector angle so that the floral arrangement wouldn't block the screen. It was a tight fit. If one of those arrangements fell, my screen would be ruined. I prayed it wouldn't come to that. Meanwhile, I texted Detective Grayson, "In position. Code red ready." He replied, "Copy. SWAT not needed." Code red was our signal for when the slide sequence showed the insurance scam. At that moment, he and his partner would step forward from the pews and show badges. I swallowed. It felt like planning a military operation. During setup, a long-haired guitarist arrived to play a hymn. He tuned his acoustic guitar in the front corner. I looked at him and thought about the absurdity of someone strumming Amazing Grace a few feet away from the drill I was about to execute. I considered asking him to play something somber, then changed my mind. Leave it. Let him be the soundtrack. When the church filled up, I slipped into the back pew. The front rows were reserved for family. Mom was already sitting with her friends, weeping softly. Sheila arrived, wearing sunglasses indoors. She gave the usher a nod and sat 3 rows back from Mom. I caught her looking at the altar like she expected some bomb to drop. Let her sweat. Pastors and pallbearers took their places on stage. The preacher cleared his throat. The bells chimed. I could feel the entire church leaning forward. I kept my phone in my pocket, ready to activate the slideshow. When the preacher said, "Let us remember Frank by sharing memories," I hit the remote. The first slide appeared behind him. Frank in a cheap plastic sombrero, margarita in hand, smiling next to Sheila. The preacher looked back at the screen, blinked, then nodded as if the guy organized it. He continued talking about Frank's generosity. Slide changed. Old photo of Dad handing out candy at my 8th birthday. Then an image of a wrecked boat with Coast Guard tape. Muffled gasps. People shifted. Just as the preacher said, he loved his wife dearly, I hit the next slide. It was the life insurance policy screenshot with the beneficiary name highlighted, Sheila Alvarez. The preacher's eyes bugged. Mom's friend Janet gasped into her handkerchief. Sheila's sunglasses slipped off her face. She squinted at the text on the screen. Perfect. Now I stood. The preacher blinked at me. I pressed the microphone button. Silence cut through the church like a knife. Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Ryan, his son, I said. My voice echoed. I have one request. Please be seated. People shuffled. I cleared my throat. Since Dad died 6 days ago, I've done some digging. Turns out, he didn't drown. He went to Belize. And this is him. I hit the remote again. The slideshow jumped to the bank statement rows, transfers in the tens of thousands. The room went still. I narrated. He emptied his company's account, left Mom and me to handle the bankruptcy. And he did it all for this woman, Sheila. She was the sole beneficiary on a $2 million insurance policy. I paused and looked straight at Sheila. She covered her mouth. I let the silence hang before moving on. Officer Grayson, would you join me? The detective emerged from the front pew. His partner flanked him. He clicked a badge out and set it on a chair. People screamed. Mom screamed. The preacher held his hands out. Son, what are you doing? He whispered. I ignored him. I clicked to the next slide. A Swiss bank alert about a flagged withdrawal. I spelled it out. This is the evidence that your father faked his death, stole millions, and left us for a vacation he never paid for. Sheila tried to stand and speak, but a plainclothes officer gently put a hand on her shoulder and guided her back into her seat. I felt a surge of relief. I had done it. The slideshow ended on the last image, Dad in handcuffs in Belize, courtesy of police reports I had leaked to the press. Flashbulbs popped as reporters who had infiltrated the back doors spilled in. I smirked. The preacher closed his Bible. We will reconvene outside. No one argued. We all moved slowly out of the sanctuary. Mom stood beside me, tears running. But this time, they didn't look empty. They looked like they carried a load of truth. Outside, cameras recorded everything. Sheila and my father were taken in separate patrol cars. I watched them go, their expressions a mix of horror and anger. I felt something shift in me, too. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was finality. We left the church, and Uncle Mike handed me the flask he had given me earlier. I took a swig. The whiskey burned down my throat like a warning and a benediction. Mom hugged me tight. I patted her back and felt her ribs through her blouse. She whispered, "Thank you for telling the truth." I nodded. Behind us, the funeral cortege had turned into a crime scene. The funeral director locked eyes with me and shook his head. I just shrugged. The moment we stepped out of the church doors, everything shifted from funeral to crime scene. Reporters with microphones clustered around Detective Grayson as he unlocked the patrol cars. Mom clung to my arm, her dress stained with tears and mascara. Sheila and Dad were each led to separate vehicles, cuffs clicking. The impersonal click of those restraints echoed louder than any hymn could have inside. People snapped photos and whispered. I heard one woman mutter, "I never thought he'd sink this low." I didn't correct her. Let her think about what she'd seen. As Dad was shoved into the back seat of his cruiser, his face went from smug confidence, like he still believed he could talk his way out, to pure shock. He mouthed my name through the tinted glass. I folded my arms, watching his expression flicker between rage and desperation. He'd always loved a captive audience. Now all he had was himself, trapped behind steel and glass. Frank's construction company accounts were already frozen, his insurance policy nullified by fraud statutes. He looked pathetic. Sheila snarled at the photographers when her door opened. She spat, "You bastard," at Dad before officers guided her in. For a second, I thought she'd fight back. But her legs gave out, and she slid into the seat, tears mixing with fury. I watched her breathe in and out, chest heaving. Whatever loyalty or greed had held her in place snapped. She knew this was irreversible. I felt a pang of something, vindication, maybe empathy. But it died quickly. Detective Grayson approached me. He removed his sunglasses, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You did good, Ryan. We'll book them both, brick by brick." I nodded. He handed me a business card and told me to call if I remembered anything else. I tucked it into my jacket pocket. It wasn't pride that made my chest swell. It was relief. A cluster of family friends hovered nearby, offering congratulations with awkward hugs. One coworker of Dad's came up and shook my hand, saying, "I'm sorry you had to go through this." I replied, "You're sorry the truth came out? That seems generous." He swallowed hard and walked away. I realized something important. Most people cared more about appearances than justice. I didn't flinch. Mom was quiet, staring at the ground as tears rolled down her cheeks. I knelt beside her. "You okay?" I asked. She looked up, her eyes red but clear, and said, "I'm free." That one word struck me like a hammer, free. She wasn't a grieving widow anymore. She was a survivor. I took her hand. It felt small in mine, but strong. Uncle Mike rounded us up and said we should get Mom home, handle the rest tomorrow. I agreed. Before I left, I turned back and watched Detective Grayson hold the door for the forensics team. They were dusting the church for fingerprints and downloading surveillance footage. I realized this funeral was never about mourning. It was about exposure. The sanctuary had become a courtroom. I carried that image with me. At home, Mom and I sat in the living room with half-empty coffee mugs. She asked what would happen next. I explained, fraud charges, asset freezes, a criminal investigation in Belize, and likely extradition hearings. She winced. I said, "Don't worry about the legal jargon. You've already got proof. We'll handle the rest." She nodded, exhausted. When she fell asleep on the couch, I stayed up drafting an email to the company accountant, instructing him to cooperate fully with investigators. No more ghosting. No more missing documents. I called Tyler, who'd been at the scene for moral support. He answered bleary-eyed at 2 a.m., asked, "So, how does it feel?" I thought for a moment. "We got him," I said, "but I feel empty, like I won something I never wanted." Tyler said, "You gave your mom back her life. That's worth more than any trophy." I agreed, but I still felt the hollow echo where vengeance had lived. Over the next week, news outlets ran headlines. Local business mogul faked death in murder for insurance plot, and shocking funeral sting catches couple in fraud scheme. I ignored them mostly. Let the world settle the score. I had to rebuild a life that didn't involve lying to everyone I loved. I went to Dad's construction office the day after the funeral, changed the locks, cleared out personal effects, and hung a small sign on the door. Closed until further notice. It felt good to claim that space. Mom started making plans, selling the house, moving to a smaller place near the coast to start over. I helped her pack up old photos, charity plaques, and framed family portraits. We laughed, remembering how Dad used to run around with detergent in his hair after helping with laundry. Those memories felt genuine, something untarnished by betrayal. In between legal meetings and media requests, I found time to walk the beachfront where he'd supposedly died. The water was calm, the sun low. I stood in the sand, barefoot, and let the salt air cleanse me. I thought about the truth I'd forced into the light. It had been messy, ruthless, and public, but it had been necessary. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter would be better. When the official extradition papers arrived, I faxed them to Sheila's lawyer and then handed them off to Detective Grayson. He said they'd be in court in 2 weeks. I hung up, closed my eyes, and breathed. It felt final. That night, I sat on the front porch with a beer in hand, looking out at the starry sky. I raised the bottle in a quiet toast. "Here's to lies finally meeting their end," I whispered. No cheers answered. No applause. Just the rhythmic crashing of waves. It was blissful. The next morning, I woke up without dread. The weight of carrying a secret was gone. In its place was a strange calm. I knew there'd be hearings, trials, property dry-ups, and more paperwork than I cared to imagine. But none of that mattered. My father had faked his death and tried to bury us in his lies. I'd unburied them first. And now, we could finally bury the memory of him as we once knew him. A man who worshipped his own reflection until it cost him everything.